in the unvaccinated group. So the rate, of course, between those is important, and that's what the study compared. These findings were troubling, including because these chronic health issues can be caused by immune system dysregulation, and vaccines can cause immune system dysregulation. Citations for this are in my written submission. Overall, the study found that after 10 years, 17% of the unvaccinated children had a chronic health issue, while 57% of the vaccinated children had at least one chronic health issue, often multiple. That's 17 versus 57%. The only real problem with this study and why it didn't get submitted for publication is that its findings did not fit the belief and the policy that vaccines are safe. Had it found vaccinated children were healthier, it no doubt would have been published immediately. But because it found the opposite, it was shoved in a drawer. We have repeatedly urged Dr. Zervos and Lamoretta to submit the study for publication. They have affirmed the study was well designed and conducted, but Dr. Zervos has said he doesn't want to lose his job. And Dr. Lamoretta has said she does not want to make doctors uncomfortable. This is a real-world example of how the science around vaccines gets corrupted, how only studies that confirm the beliefs and policies that vaccines are safe get published. Everything else gets shoved in a drawer. This selection bias is dangerous and results in corrupting all the science concerning vaccine safety. We can protect children from infectious disease, and we can protect children from vaccine harms. We should and we must do both.
Thank you, Mr. Siri. Our next witness is Dr. Toby Rogers. Dr. Rogers is a fellow at the Brownstone Institute for Social and Economic Research. He has a PhD in political economy from the University of Sydney and a master in public policy from UC Berkeley. His research focuses on regulatory capture and corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. Mr. Roberts.
Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Blumenthal, and members of the Permanent Subcommittee. On July 4th, 2015, my then partner's son was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. I was in a PhD program in political economy at the University of Sydney, where I had access to almost all current scientific and medical journals. I wanted to better understand what was happening, so I went to the CDC's webpage on the causes of autism. As a PhD student, I was trained to focus on primary source documents, so I read all the references and their footnotes. To my surprise, I quickly discovered the CDC's narrative did not add up. Claims that autism is genetic don't make sense because autism prevalence was rising too fast. There's no such thing as a genetic epidemic. Then the CDC blamed valproic acid, a treatment for epilepsy that is contraindicated in pregnancy, and thalidomide, which was never approved for use in the United States. Finally, the CDC pointed to advanced parental age, but the odds ratios were modest, and the increase in the proportion of older parents is insufficient to explain the surge in autism prevalence. Furthermore, the cost of autism was already in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year in the US, and yet government was not responding with a sense of urgency. I changed my doctoral thesis topic to the political economy of autism and spent the next 4 years reading and analyzing nearly everything that's been written on autism prevalence, causation, and cost. In 2019, my thesis passed rigorous external peer review. It's now in the top 10 of the most downloaded doctoral research papers in the history of the University of Sydney. Since then, I've continued my research with Children's Health Defense as an independent journalist and as a fellow at Brownstone Institute. Here are the facts. In 1970, the first autism prevalence study in the US found an autism rate of less than 1 in 10,000 children. According to a study by the EPA, sometime around 1987, the autism rate in the US began to skyrocket. The most recent report from the CDC showed that 1 in 31 8-year-old children in the US in 2022 were on the autism spectrum. That's a 32,158% increase in the last 52 years. 2 massive studies from the best epidemiologists in California show that changes in diagnostic criteria only explain a small fraction of the rise in autism prevalence. There are 22 studies that claim that vaccines don't cause autism. None of these studies have a completely unvaccinated control group. So unfortunately, if you want to understand what's causing the autism epidemic, These studies are of no use. Then there are 5 large genetic research projects: AGREE, SSC, ASC, MISSING, and SPARK. Together, they've produced 501 published papers. The search for the gene for autism has consumed over $2.3 billion, and researchers have almost nothing to show for it because genes don't suddenly create epidemics. The human genome just doesn't change that fast. Then there are 4 large epigenetic research projects, so genes and the environment: CHARGE, MARBLES, SEED, and EARLY. Combined, they've produced 437 publications that look at the effects of air pollution, pesticides, fluorinated substances, PCBs, nutritional factors, flame retardants, maternal metabolic conditions, and volatile organic compounds. None of these studies control for vaccines as a possible covariate or confounder, so it's impossible to know the true impact of these variables. The critical missing piece in autism research is vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. Thankfully, there are now 6 good studies that we can rely on. Unfortunately, these studies have been systematically suppressed and ignored by the mainstream media and the medical establishment. 2 studies by Gallagher and Goodman show that the birth dose of the hepatitis B vaccine significantly increases autism risk. 3 studies by Anthony Mawson confirm that vaccination increases the odds of developing autism by at least 4.2-fold. Preterm birth, coupled with vaccination, increases the odds of neurodevelopmental disability by more than 12-fold compared to preterm birth without vaccination. And finally, a study by Hooker and Miller published in 2021 found that vaccination increases autism risk 5-fold. Vaccination in the absence of breastfeeding increases autism risk 12.5-fold. Vaccination in addition to C-section birth increases autism risk 18.7-fold. After conducting this systematic review of 1,000 studies, my belief is that the autism and chronic disease epidemics are primarily caused by toxicants, mostly from vaccines and about a dozen additional toxicants. If we stop exposing children to these hazards in the first place, that would stop the epidemics of chronic illness in children. Now we must summon the political will to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Our final witness is Dr. Jake Scott. Dr. Scott is a board-certified infectious disease physician and clinical associate professor at Stanford University School of Medicine. He attended the University of Vermont College of Medicine. He currently provides inpatient and outpatient care for general infectious diseases. Dr. Scott.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Blumenthal, and members of the subcommittee, thank you sincerely for the opportunity to testify. It is a true privilege to be here. My name is Jake Scott, and I'm an infectious diseases physician at Stanford. I've spent my career treating patients and evaluating medical evidence with a focus on vaccine safety and efficacy. I have no financial conflicts of interest. My vaccine research is either self-funded or supported by Stanford University. Since April, I've co-led an international team building what we believe is the most comprehensive database of vaccine trials ever assembled. We set out to answer a fundamental question: what does the complete trial record actually show? 51 trials using inert placebo controls with saline, sterile water, or other biologically inactive substances. Of these, 503 involved antigens that routine childhood vaccines are based on. Most importantly, we confirmed that all 16 antigens routinely recommended for children have been studied in placebo-controlled trials. Every single one. The claim that childhood vaccines haven't been tested against placebos is demonstrably false. I'm also a senior researcher on a systematic review analyzing respiratory virus immunizations published over the last 2 years. 590 studies from over 17,000 identified references that we screened through the Vaccine Integrity Project. Our safety monitoring systems work. They detected intussusception with RotaShield in 1 in 10,000. The vaccine was withdrawn. They caught Johnson & Johnson blood clots at 3 per million. When early myocarditis reports emerged, CDC proactively alerted clinicians to enhance surveillance before the signal was confirmed. Within weeks, the risk was quantified, communicated, and incorporated into guidance. These systems detect events as rare as 1 in a million doses. The unpublished Henry Ford analysis being presented today is fundamentally flawed by design. Unlike our publicly accessible database, This study remained hidden from peer review after 5 years. The core problem, vaccinated children had twice the follow-up time, substantially more healthcare visits than unvaccinated children. When diagnoses require doctor visits, children seeing doctors more often will inevitably have more recorded conditions. This is classic detection bias that inflates risk estimates without reflecting true health differences. The study reports 0 ADHD cases among thousands of unvaccinated children. How is that possible? With a national prevalence at 11%, that's highly unlikely unless conditions went undiagnosed. They claimed 6 to 8-fold increase in ear infections. That lacks biological plausibility, but it's fully consistent with differential healthcare utilization. Additionally, the study found no association with autism, an adjusted hazard ratio of 0.62. Yet the authors emphasize selected findings while disregarding this null result for the very condition many claim vaccines cause. How do you explain that? What does rigorous published research show? A Danish study of 1.2 million children found no association between aluminum exposure from vaccines and 50 different chronic conditions. Meta-analyses encompassing millions of children consistently find no link between vaccines and autism. Throughout my career, I've treated countless patients with vaccine-preventable diseases. During COVID, I lost unvaccinated patients who would have survived with vaccination. These realities coexist. Vaccines can cause rare adverse events, and they do, and they prevent vastly more death and disability. We're experiencing our worst measles outbreak in decades, 1,431 cases and 3 deaths in 2025. No kid should die from measles. The choice before this committee is clear. Base public health policy on transparent, peer-reviewed evidence that anyone can verify, or on an unpublished analysis with acknowledged fatal biases hidden from scientific scrutiny. Vaccines have saved 154 million lives globally over 50 years. The data are public. The evidence is overwhelming. Parents deserve policies grounded in this evidence. Thank you. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. I'll start with the questioning. I'll just basically turn it over to Mr. Siri. Do you want to start with the 154 million claim? But we had the ranking member, and we also had Dr. Scott say that the Henry Ford study was highly flawed by design. Do you want to maybe start there and defend the Henry Ford study?
Whatever you would like, Senator, I'm happy to do that, yes. Thank you. Happy to start wherever you'd like. In terms of the Henry Ford study, I appreciate Dr. Scott's comment, but I don't believe Dr. Scott has actually read my submission, given his comments about what he believes makes this study fatally flawed. He points to one thing. He calls it detection bias, because what he's saying is that the vaccinated children are more likely to seek medical care than the unvaccinated children. Had he read my submission, he would have seen that the study authors who were looking to validate the safety of these vaccines specifically conducted sensitivity analysis to see whether there was detection bias. How did they do that? What they did is they looked at the average number of times that the vaccinated cohort sought medical care versus the unvaccinated. And what they found was vaccinated children sought medical care on average 7 times a year. Unvaccinated sought it twice a year, which would make sense if you have less illness. But for the unvaccinated kids, those 17% that had a chronic health issue, they sought medical care on average 5 times, which reflects that when an unvaccinated child had a medical issue, they did go see the doctor. Number 2, as the study points out, the type of health conditions that we saw in the unvaccinated population are not ones you wouldn't see medical care from. If your child has a serious medical condition, you're going to your doctor. You're going to the medical system. And that's not me saying it. That's what these study authors pointed out. Also, to further validate their findings, they even reran their study to remove any child that didn't seek any medical care. So essentially, they removed the healthiest unvaccinated children, another sensitivity analysis they did, and they still found the statistically significant outcome that that I discussed earlier. Now, the other thing they did to make sure that their results were valid, and again, I assume they did this because they wanted to try and do exactly what Dr. Scott is saying. Well, there's got to be a mistake here. It can't be that this is true. And so the other thing that they did is they conducted a sensitivity analysis whereby they removed any children from the study that weren't in the Henry Ford system from birth onward for at least 5 years, thinking, okay, well, maybe we, got it wrong because the unvaccinated kids, had an average duration of less time. But so by doing that, we're only going to look at kids who were in there for at least 5 years. And what they found was, consistent with the findings, affirming the findings, the risk ratio of chronic disease amongst the vaccinated went up, not down. They also did that sensitivity analysis at 3 years and at 1 year. And each time they still found the vaccinated children a statistically significant increased rate of chronic health issues. They also used cancer as a control, assuming, well, there's no reason vaccines should cause cancer, and they didn't find a statistically significant outcome. So the issue that Dr. Scott points to in a study, which, by the way, he's labeling fundamentally flawed, there was enough information in my submission to have understood what I just said.
He actually said it was flawed by design. You know the study authors of this thing that the people conducted. Do you believe these are professionals that would design a study by design to make it flawed, to give a result that vaccinated children suffered chronic illness 2.5 times? I mean, that's basically what Dr. Scott is saying to the authors of this Henry Ford study.
I mean, I think from the perspective of the establishment, this study is flawed because it's actually designed to detect safety. It's actually designed to reach a conclusion on safety. That's what makes it flawed. It's not like the aluminum study that Dr. Scott pointed to, which he called, rigorous.
Let me, so you can get down in the weeds very quickly, and you have to, quite honestly.
Yes.
This is true. But let's pull it back a little bit. I heard for the first time during the RFK Jr. hearing that there's been a study that vaccines have saved 154 million lives. You have a somewhat interesting take on that. Do you want to talk
sure.
a bit about that scientific gem?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the claim about 154 million lives saved is it actually is the epitome of the corruption of science. It reflects the corruption of science in action. While this Henry Ford study, for example, is based on actual data, medical records, the immunization registry, and look carefully at it, this study is just based on guesswork and assumptions. It is a study published by the WHO. It is essentially an advertising piece by them for how effective their immunization program has been over the last 50 years. And they claim there's 154 million lives saved. But when you look at the study, unlike the Henry Ford study, it has no confidence intervals. So what is the confidence interval of that 154 million claim? What is the reliability range of it? It doesn't have one. You know why it doesn't have one? Because it's totally unreliable. As buried in page 42 of the supplement to that quote-unquote advertising piece by the WHO, it's in a section entitled Uncertainty of Estimates, it says that, quote, it cannot put, quote, bounds around the veracity of the estimates. It can't put bounds around the veracity of the estimates. And that, quote, any bounds are arbitrary, end quote, and that, quote, it should not be interpreted as a claim to where the edges of valid estimates possibly lie, end quote. What that means is it could be equally true that 200 million lives were lost because of the vaccine program. It's an unbounded estimate. That is the corruption of science, to rely on that. And it gets worse from there because And when you actually look at the hard data, the number makes no sense. Almost the entirety of that 154 million lives saved comes down to two vaccines, DTP and measles vaccine. Well, as laid out thoroughly in my submission, the studies that look at DTP vaccine show that it causes more mortality, far more mortality, than lives saved. While it may reduce deaths from diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, the studies show numerous rate the kids. The seminal study showed that the kids who got DTP died at 10 times the rate, 10 times the rate, than kids who did not get that vaccine. And that is, I'll give the PubMed number, it's 5360569. And that study is not just one study sitting on its own. It comes after a long series of studies. It was published in 2017, and then another one in 2018. And DTP is the most commonly used vaccine in the world. That's what the science, based on hard data, that has confidence intervals, shows. Not this WHO advertising report with no confidence intervals. The other vaccine that accounts for almost the entirety of the 154 million lives saved is the measles vaccine. The study assumes, I guess to its credit, that 60% of that decline was from other factors, and 40% of the decline in measles mortality was from the vaccine. But here's the thing. When you look at the decline in measles mortality in other countries when there were no vaccines, like the US, between 1900 and the first vaccine in 1963, measles mortality declined by 99%. That's CDC data, not assumption. When you look at the UK data, between 1900 and 1968, when they first started the first measles vaccine there, measles mortality there declined by 99%. So when you overlay that number, not use a 40% decline, but 99%, and then you add in the increased deaths from DTP, you're upside down already. That's why they can't put a bound on their $154 million lives claim. Those vaccines cost a lot more than $154 million.
Let me give Senator Marino a chance. Okay.
May I ask one last point on this, and I will stop. I'm sorry. And it's this. As I've laid out in my submission, study after study after study shows that people who get measles vaccine die at far less lower rates from heart disease and from various cancers. It's not me saying that. I'm just a lawyer, as Senator Blumenthal pointed out, okay? But that's what the studies show, and they're consistent. They're an inconvenient truth when it comes to the medical establishment. When you add in that data as well, it's really upside down. I lay that out, including a 100,000-person, 20-year prospective study in Japan that found that those who got measles and mumps, about 7% were dead from heart disease after about 20 years, whereas those who didn't get measles and mumps, around 14% of them were dead after 20 years. Heart disease is the #1 killer of folks in the United States. I'll stop there.
We'll continue. Senator Marino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing. Thank you all for caring about this issue and being here. Mr. Chairman, I was going to direct my first question actually to the ranking member, but he's not here. So I just want to pause for a second, because there's a lot of things that I've seen in my first 8 months here in elected office that happens. It's a little crazy. So I just want us to reflect on something the ranking member said. He said that a person should be fired for exercising their First Amendment rights. And I think we normalize bad behavior like that. We just say, well, that's what people can say. And the comment was about the Second Amendment. You know, something about citizens got to defend themselves. I'm going to read something into the record, and I'm going to submit something for the record. Then we'll get on. So there was a gentleman that said the following: the people's ability to arm themselves and form state militias provide a powerful check on the federal power, ensuring the populace can resist potential government overreach. In fact, went on to say that an armed citizenry is the best defense against an ambitious government. Now, the ranking member would have that person fired. What the ranking member may not realize, and I want to submit to the record, is Federalist 46, written by James Madison. So the person that created the Constitution that allows us to do our job here for 240 plus years should be fired for saying that we should have the right to protect ourselves. That's pretty outrageous. And I thought that was an important part to clarify for the record. So again, without objection, we'll submit Federalist 46 to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. It's available at the archives as well. All right, so let's talk about Mr. Siri, I think the main issue here is about biases. Would you agree that when you have a study, now, like, I'm a business major, I'm not a science major, but I think the issue here is there a bias in your work? Would you agree that that's foundational? And all three of you can answer that. Is being free of bias important? Mr. Siri, yes or no?
Absolutely, and it's hard to find, obviously. Everybody's got a bias. That's human nature. There's no such thing as something that's unbiased. That's why you want to have as rigorous a design to a study
Oh, yes.
beforehand.
So having clear
Yes, sir.
biases, okay. All right.
Yes, sir.
He won't be as generous with my time. Dr. Rogers, would you agree? Yes, no? Being free of bias is really important?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And then, Dr. Scott, would you agree with that?
Certainly.
Okay. So let's talk about the topic of bias. Would the following statement be considered biased or unbiased? Our president is a misinformation super spreader. I know this isn't surprising to a lot of people, but it's deeply disturbing. Biased comment or unbiased comment? Is that based on science?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
It
Quick.
reflects
This
a-
should be quick.
It
Yes or
reflects,
no?
reflects a bias against the president.
Dr. Rogers, a biased statement, yes or no?
Agreed, biased.
Dr. Scott, biased? Okay, that was your statement, your tweet on October 1st of 2020. Trump spews misinformation like no other. For our president to say that the problem is that doctors taking care of patients dying from COVID are venal and are committing fraud to cook the books is so low, it's subterranean. Biased or unbiased?
Yes, sir.
Biased?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Scott? Okay, that was your statement in October 25th of 2020. Trump's response to the U.S. COVID crisis when interviewed by Chris Wallace, it is what it is. Vote like your life depends on it. Biased or unbiased? Mr. Siri?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Rogers?
I think voting's a good thing, but I don't really have an opinion on that one.
But that your life depends on whether this election happens, like you will die if the wrong outcome occurs?
Yeah, that
seems biased.
Seems overstated.
Seems
yeah.
overstated. Dr. Scott?
I stand by it.
Okay, July of 2020, your statement. There are 69 days left of the Trump administration. While he schemes to survive politically, thousands of Americans will die. The number of COVID deaths yesterday was 1,421. If the death toll remains the same, then 98,049 deaths will occur between now and January 20th. Biased?
Given the data at the time, I think yes.
Dr. Rogers?
COVID deaths in the Biden administration far exceeded COVID deaths during
yeah,
the
biased.
first Trump administration.
Scott?
Yeah.
I hope you get into his post, too.
So biased. Okay. Now, interesting because prior to me coming to Congress, people think I was in the retail automotive business, and that's true, but I also had a tech company. I'm going to tell you a 30-second story. We were asked during COVID to develop a schematic where somebody could validate whether they were vaccinated or not or tested positive or not using our blockchain agent. I thought that was terrible technology, so we decided not to do it. But when we had my tech team explore it, what I thought was fascinating was there was no way to find out who had tested positive or who tested negative. There was no data. So, typically with a computer system, you have to plug into a data source, pull the data so that you can report it out. So when we went to the state and said, hey, give me the data, who's been tested and who tested negative, who tested positive, you know what the response was? We don't have that data. It's like, well, that's fascinating because every night when I turn on the news, they tell me it's 1,421 people died of COVID. I'm like, well, that's interesting because if the data doesn't exist, then how do you know that's true? So I just thought I'd share that with you a little bit. So the other piece of the equation is when we talk about science, I think there has to be a certain humility. Now, my dad was a doctor. He beat in our heads that the key to being a doctor is to have humility. I think the humility should be able for us to look back 4 or 5 years later and go, we made a lot of mistakes. A lot of people were harmed. And I think it's the failure of that humility that's infuriating to a lot of people. I'll give you some examples. I have a 4-year-old grandbaby. A 2-year-old grandbaby just turned 2 yesterday. Do you think it was appropriate, yes or no, Mr. Siri, if a 2-year-old have been put a mask on, a 2-year-old? Is that a good idea?
I believe that everybody should be able to make their own medical decisions.
But again, just generally speaking, putting a mask on a 2-year-old.
I wouldn't put a mask on a 2-year-old
Okay.
if it was my choice.
Dr. Rogers?
No,
Dr.
would I.
Scott?
I wouldn't either.
Okay. You tweeted in January of 2021 that you masked your 2-year-old and that all 2-year-olds should be masked. I'll submit the tweet for the record. that your 2-year-old, I don't know that you have a 2-year-old we've never met.
Well, I changed my mind.
Okay. But again, having the humility to say that was a bad idea. Yeah. Having the
I'm
humility,
admitting it. I'm admitting it.
which is good. I applaud you for that. Having the humility to say, having the humility to say that when you walk into a bar, after having a mask on outside, and then you walk to your table, and then you take your mask off to eat, made sense. We can now look back and go, that was ridiculous.
And I tweeted about that numerous times, how ridiculous that was. So,
Well, I'll submit another tweet.
bias. This is selection bias right here.
I'll put your tweet on the record in which you actually said that a man walked outside with a mask, walked into a restaurant, got in a seat, took off his mask and drank a beer and sat with everybody doing the same, as in like, hey, that's normal. In fact, you said something that I thought was very interesting. You said COVID-19 may never go away. So let's keep people isolated and masked. I will submit these for the records. COVID-19 may never go away as a way to keep people locked up inside, keep people out of schools. In my state, in my city, Cleveland, Ohio, we closed our schools for 18 months. You look at why we have youth violence today, you draw a straight line right to those decisions during COVID. That wasn't a virus that made those decisions. Those were elected officials that decided that control of people was more important. And Dr. Scott, I'll give you a chance here. You also said that 1.2 million people died from COVID. From COVID. Now, I was on the board of Metro Health in Cleveland. We had no idea what actually caused people's mortality. What we did do, because the hospital could collect more money, was we labeled anybody who had COVID, who also died, including motorcycle accidents, of dying from COVID. I think what you meant to say, I'm going to give you a chance to clear it up. Did you mean 1.2 million people died with COVID as opposed to from COVID? See the difference?
Oh, I do see the difference. And I also commented quite a bit about the difficulty making that distinction after vaccines had become available. But I think early on, yes, there were a lot of deaths. I lost over 100 patients, okay?
From COVID or with COVID?
From COVID. COVID was terrible.
But we had more
it
death-
definitely became much more complicated to reconcile people who died with COVID from COVID.
But you didn't have a problem. You were a pretty definitive statement. But what Dr. Rogers said earlier was interesting, which is more people died during the Biden years. Now, just to remind everybody, it's important. Biden put out an executive order that said if you don't get vaccinated, you could lose your job. Think about how insane our public policy got. And I think I speak for at least the people I know that this was an important issue. Just maybe start by acknowledging you made a mistake, apologizing for shaming those of us who said, yeah, that's stupid. Like, yeah, that makes no sense. And acknowledging that if we don't have sovereignty over our bodies, then we are not free people. With that, all right. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Marino. I got a lot of questions. We're going to take a lot of time, and people are going to have a chance to respond here. By the way, PSI hearings are definitely different than normal Senate hearings. I mean, when I first got here, it had Senator Levin. He would have a book that thick, and the hearings would literally run all day long. Go through in detail. That's kind of like to do here tonight. It's not all day long because we only have the afternoon, but we're going to get into a lot of detail here. Dr. Scott, you did mention you said about 100 COVID patients. Can I just ask you, what did you treat them with? What were your drugs of choice? I mean, what was the treatment?
Yeah, so I've treated hundreds of COVID patients, and
did you say you lost 100 then? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to.
I lost dozens of patients, probably over 100. I lost track, to be honest. Okay. It was awful. Okay. I lost many nursing home folks who live nearby, and multiple a day sometimes.
What was the protocol did you use? Did you use remdesivir? Were you using monoclonal antibodies? Did you ever try ivermectin or budesonide or some of the other generic drugs that were recommended?
So I was going based on the best available evidence. My role was actually to focus on the best available evidence for therapeutics. I helped develop the guidelines. And so, yeah, we used, remdesivir if patients met eligibility. We used dexamethasone, which clearly shows or had been shown to be life-saving.
By the way, I had Pierre
supportive care.
Corey, I think in May of 2020. He talked about corticosteroids. He was vilified and savaged in the media till a couple months later. They actually had a study come out of England that dexamethasone worked, which is a corticosteroid. Now, generally underdosed when they gave it, but regardless, continue.
Yeah, so we used a number of things. Did I ever use ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine? I don't think so.
Were you aware of the Surgisphere study on hydroxychloroquine?
No, that doesn't sound familiar.
You've never heard of that, huh? It was published, I think, in May of 2020. Totally came out against hydroxychloroquine, but had to be retracted, I think, 2 weeks later because the data was completely made up. But it had its impact. It completely sabotaged the use of hydroxychloroquine and zinc and Z-Pak.
Well,
Again, just so that's just one example. It kind of surprises me if you're on the front lines trying to treat people you've never even heard of the Surgisphere, which probably turned off a lot of doctors like you who rely on the New England Journal of Medicine, even though Dr. Mark Angel said you really shouldn't or can't. Done that. But let's move on. I think Mr. Sirius kind of covered the 154 million, which was the first time I heard that. And again, I would call that propaganda. It's not science. Somebody's got some model, fine. I can play with numbers too. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you how you can use numbers. Dr. Scott, you talked about the Commonwealth estimate of 3.2 million lives saved here in the U.S. in 2021 and 2022, correct? You're pretty confident of that one?
It's one of a few studies. Yep, these estimates are not easy to make, but yeah, that's one study.
Define study. Were there confidence intervals around that 3.2 million?
It was a modeling study, yeah. It
was published on a blog, wasn't it? Is that correct, Mr. Siri?
It's a blog.
That study was covered on a...
Yeah, the Commonwealth quote-unquote study is not a study, it's a blog. It's not a peer-reviewed study, it's not in a journal, it was published on a blog.
Let's put up this little chart that I'm somewhat famous for charts. So let's look at real data. So this is CDC data. So in 2019, total deaths in the U.S. were 2.85 million. Okay, then we had the pandemic year, 2020, 3.38 million, a little under 3.4 million. So that's an increase of a little more than 500,000 people died in the first year of COVID. The following year, 3.46 million people, more people in the second year of the pandemic, 2021, when the vaccines were rolling out. And I think we were close to 70% take up of vaccines by fall of 2021, I believe.
Some of the estimates are that by the second quarter, over 60% of Americans had some form of immunity.
Then in 2022, we started backing down. Now, I think Mr. Siri kind of argues in your piece that, if the vaccines really worked, you'd think even by 2021, because those things are being rolled out pretty quick, you'd probably see those death counts come down, but they didn't. But here's the point I'm trying to make with this Commonwealth Fund study. They estimated 3.2 million people's lives were saved in 2021 and 2022. So if you add that to the actual death count, what Commonwealth Fund is assuming is that in 2021, had it not been for the vaccines, more than 5 million people would have lost their lives in America. In 2022, 4.88 million people would have lost their lives. Dr. Scott, is that even close to credible to think that we'd go from 2.85 million lives lost in 2019, have a pandemic, no vaccines, unfortunately the NIH was sabotaging treatment using effective generic drugs, telling people, don't treat at all, go home, be afraid, hope you don't have to go in the hospital where they'll plug remdesivir in your veins and hook you up to a ventilator and you probably never come off, okay? So we had no treatment, had 3.38 million people die that year. Are we really supposed to believe the next year we were going to leap up to 5 million lives lost in America? And then the following year, close to 5 again? Because that's what you'd have to be. In order to save 1.6 million lives in 2021 and 2022, you'd have to be assuming the death rate was going to go from 2.85 million in 2019, 3.4 million in 2019, and then leap up to 5 million in 2021 and 22. Is that at all plausible? Do you believe that? Do you believe that we were literally, had it not been for the vaccine, 5 million Americans would have lost their lives in 2021 and 2022?
Yeah, I believe that's credible to me. I mean, were you on the front lines? Because it was awful. I honestly cannot express how terrible it was.
It was terrible.
And there was a dramatic,
It was
decline.
It was terrible in 2020. And the total death
dramatic
toll was
decline in
3.4
death
million.
rates after the vaccines were rolled out.
Let's-
Dramatic.
Let's
So
move on. Let's move
I'm
on
not
to some
gonna
other.
parse over these modeling studies, but let's talk about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. I mean, there were a number of studies that looked into that.
This is
some
about,
of which I was involved in.
This is about research. And by the way, I'm happy to invite you back when I'll have Dr.
would
McCulloch
love to
and I
come
have
back.
Dr. Good. We'll do that. Okay, we will absolutely have you come back.
Thank you.
And we'll talk about hospital protocols. We'll talk about early treatment. I would love to do that because I've never been able to get people to actually debate or discuss this with that the doctors did have the courage and compassion to treat COVID, okay? And I appreciate you did as well. So anyway, so you think it's credible. I mean, the records show that Dr. Scott thinks, yeah, we had 5 million people die in 2021 and 2022. Mr. Siri, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I could add to that just a little bit, which is that, and this is part of my submission as well, that the data reflects that in 2020, when there was no vaccine, the vaccine was first rolled out at the end of December 2020, about 18% of folks, 17% of Americans were infected. And presumably, by the way, the weakest, most frail among us passed away in 2020. Then we get to 2021, where again the data reflects, and this is my submission, around the same percentage of Americans were again infected. Okay, so no vaccine, like you pointed out, that was the increase. Then there was a vaccine in 2021. The vaccination rate went through all, sky high by the second quarter of 2021. When Delta's coming, the immunity rate, according to the data, is over 60%, but yet all-cause mortality increases. And I'll point out one last thing about this. Remdesivir, and this is a great example of the
By the way,
corruption.
you know what nurses call that? Run, death is near.
Well, I'll give you an example of the corruption of science with remdesivir. The way you should do a study is you come up with a study design, and then you implement it, because this way you avoid introducing bias. If you start the study and then you're like, ooh, you don't like what you're finding, and you change the study design, that introduces bias. And that is exactly what happened during the remdesivir clinical trial. The endpoints in the middle of the trial were changed by Gilead as it was going on. In fact, we wrote to Dr. Fauci specifically about that. That is precisely what you should never do. It introduces bias so they can get the results.
By the way, do you remember how many people had some kind of financial conflict of interest, the people that approved that with Gilead?
Yeah,
It's like 9 out of 16 or something like that.
a significant number. And obviously, there's lots of folks who've treated COVID during the pandemic, and there's lots of, you had Dr. Jordan here, for example, and he's had a clinic. I think he has dozens and dozens of clinics around the country, and he lost, as he would explain, the protocols he implemented, lost very few people to COVID. I know other doctors in that similar situation using budesonide and so forth.
Dr. Rogers, you have something? Dr. Scott, I think you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want to add to this debate. So I watched every single meeting of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices and the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee in 2021, 2022, and 2023, when all these COVID shots were being authorized for use in this country. And after a while, the CDC's own research showed that the protection from the vaccine, if any, was between months 2 and 6. And by 6 months, it showed negative efficacy. So I'm watching the hearings on my, computer screen at home. I'm yelling at the screen. The COVID shots have negative efficacy after 6 months. Tell me how A shot with negative efficacy is saving lives, and it has the worst side effect profile of any vaccine in human history. So how exactly is a vaccine with the worst side effects and negative efficacy saving lives? That's a preposterous claim. What ended the COVID pandemic was the Omicron variant that was more transmissible but less lethal. The vaccine, how many people it helped? I think it's an open debate. It could be a net negative.
Well, maybe we can look at the clinical trial data in which 21 people died in the vaccinated group and 17 died in the placebo group.
I do want to, again, I believe the first study that came out of showing negative efficacy came out of Denmark. But Dr. Scott, you said you wanted to say something, then I'll turn it over to Senator Blumenthal.
Well, I just want to say, in 2020, 2021, my colleagues and I were doing absolutely everything we could to save lives, okay? We weren't using remdesivir because we were paid to use remdesivir. And remdesivir, I have to say, I never thought was, a game changer, but it also, it's not that.
By the way, the hospitals were
Unsafe.
paid handsomely for using remdesivir.
Okay, well, I never saw that.
And coding somebody as a COVID patient as well. But
I never saw that. But in terms of whether or not the vaccine saved lives, it's not just that one study. I mean, there's there's a Stanford Ioannidis study from that was published in JAMA recently that showed that the COVID vaccines probably averted 2.5 million deaths. So you're cherry picking by saying that I'm hanging my hat on that one Commonwealth study. I'm not, because I've also posted about these other studies as well. How many lives did the COVID vaccine save? I don't know. I don't know for sure. But I did see with my own eyes the dramatic decline in deaths between December of 2020 and mid 2021.
Variants did change, and Omicron was less lethal. But
Omicron-
Delta was a real problem.
Omicron didn't hit until 2022.
I understand. Delta was a real problem. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think we all know that COVID-19 had a devastating impact on families across the country. It caused deaths and still impacts the lives of a lot of people. The creation of COVID-19 vaccines through Operation Warp Speed, led by then President Trump and now President Trump, was not just one of the greatest achievements in his administration, but it changed the course of the pandemic. The vaccine saved lives and allowed others to begin to rebuild. But unfortunately, just as the vaccine became available, a lot of misinformation about its safety and efficacy spread, and hostility toward vaccines and the public health system that monitors them makes them less available. I want to ask you, Dr. Scott, you saw firsthand what it was like to treat patients when the COVID-19 pandemic began and after the vaccine was approved and disseminated. Based on the studies you've done, do you believe that the COVID-19 vaccines and others have helped save lives and been safe and effective?
Thank you, Senator. So when it comes to safety, I personally am not a big fan of the slogan, vaccines are safe and effective, because there are nuances, right? Nothing is 100% safe. Are COVID vaccines 100% safe? No. Are they generally very safe? Yes. Are they the least safe vaccine ever? No. That's absurd. Show me some evidence that indicates that.
About ready to.
Yeah, please. I'll come back to discuss that. Were the COVID vaccines effective? Yes. I mean, so 2020 was like nothing my colleagues or I had ever seen or expected. It was awful. I'm not making this up, okay? I mean, it was just a nightmare. And despite our best efforts, I lost many, many patients.
Is there let me ask you, is there a reason you believe that the Henry Ford Health System study hasn't been published and has flaws?
Yes, I think that's a great question. I mean, and so one important question is, which peer-reviewed journals have reviewed and rejected this manuscript? What biological mechanism could explain vaccines increasing ear infections by 600%? Do you accept the study's null finding for autism, or only the results that support your narrative? What are the models that adjust for the massive difference in healthcare visits between groups? The analysis reports 0 cases of common conditions like ADHD. That is statistically impossible. There was a cohort of 2,000 children. There should have been hundreds of such diagnoses, unless they were undetected. And let me just clarify, when I said flawed by design, I didn't mean that they deliberately, meant for it to be flawed. I just meant the study design itself had flaws in it, okay? It was methodologically flawed, not deliberately flawed, of course.
And thousands of studies have been done and published, correct?
Correct.
And let me ask you, the seeming assumption here is that this is the only study that ever has gone unpublished. In fact, a lot of studies go unpublished, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and I review studies before they're published for a number of different journals. And
Because they're subject to peer review
right.
and
it's not just
analysis.
one person. It's, multiple people are reviewing these articles. And if something warrants publication, it's, the other thing is, I've recently been reviewing hundreds and hundreds of papers for these 2 massive vaccine review projects.
And simply to be published isn't the only means to make a study public, correct? In fact,
Right.
in this body, we have press conferences, we do hearings. This particular study was done and completed in 2020, and now, apparently for the first time, it's being revealed.
Right.
Has it been available during this last 5 years?
That's a great question. I mean, there's preprints, Substacks, obviously, a number of ways to get a study out there. The fact that it's been shelved for 5 years, I think, is saying something.
Mr. Siri, why haven't you held a press conference? Why have you kept this study under wraps?
I appreciate the question. It's never been submitted to a journal, and the hope has always been that it would be submitted to a journal, because I agree with you. It should undergo peer review. It should be submitted to a
I'm
journal,
not
but
saying-
they will not submit it because they don't want to get fired. That is what they told us. We've met with the authors many times. These are validly pro-vaccine individuals. They don't want their institution, the journals, their funding sources, their friends, their colleagues, everybody to turn against them, which is exactly what will happen if they even submit this
But
thing
that is
for
not my
publication.
question, and I apologize
Oh,
for
I'm sorry.
interrupting because I'm limited on time. There are lots of other ways to make findings known.
They don't want to get fired.
No, I'm talking to you.
Oh, because I want, they are the scientists. They're the ones who have their name on it. They should put it out, not me. My hope is that they would put it out. I wanted the normal course scientific process to work. Look, it's a retrospective epidemiological study. Let them put it in a preprint. Let it go through peer review. Let others try to replicate it. Maybe they'll find a different result.
I'm really curious why you and Senator Johnson or another member of the Congress or members of the health community didn't hold.
Let me answer that for you.
Can
okay?
I just
let me
finish
answer
my question?
Sure, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
But I'm going to answer it for you.
I'm curious why, for the first time,
Yes.
we're hearing about a study which was completed 5 years ago.
Like I said, my hope has always been that the scientists would publish it, and we've tried to persuade them many, many times so it can go through the normal peer review process. I don't want to run ahead and go put it out there, because you know what that would do? It's going to happen exactly what's happening right now, is you're going to say the things that you're saying, Senator. Well, this is not going through the normal process. This isn't getting submitted to a journal. The answer to that is, I'm going to say it again, it epitomizes the corruption of science. It shows precisely why studies that show vaccines have problems never
I
get
don't
published.
think, with all due respect,
So,
Mr. Siri,
let
that
me
you've
do it.
answered my question.
Let me answer it,
And-
okay?
and
No, let me
Mr.
answer. Your
Chairman,
time's
the reason
expired.
we have witnesses is so
I
that they can
understand,
answer our
but
question.
I'm part of this. I'm part of this answer. Okay. First of all, you're not paying attention to what they're saying. The people who conducted this study, highly professional, highly respected, obviously concerned about their jobs. Del Bigtree and Aaron Siri convinced them to do this study. They don't want to have their jobs put in jeopardy. But they respect the fact that these people actually did the study as they requested. When
I
I
don't-
found,
with all due respect,
let me
we
hear.
have, I just want to announce,
no,
we have a
when I-
vote going on. I'm going to leave to vote because
Okay,
more than 90 of our colleagues have voted, and I don't want to miss the vote. So if you
you're-
want to hold your answer until I get back, that's fine. I really want to hear from the witness,
Sure.
not from you, Mr. Chairman, because we can talk to each other
I'm the one-
anytime.
I am the one that prompted this release. Once I found out about it, I said, well, if you don't release it, if they don't release it.
Why didn't he tell you about it earlier?
I'm going to release it.
Why didn't he come forward and with members
Because
of
he
this
felt
group?
he felt sympathy for the authors about losing their jobs. I'm sorry, I feel the same sympathy, but this is too important to protect their jobs. This is information the public should have had in 2020, and I forced the issue. There's the bottom line. I forced the issue. So there's your answer. But by the way, you can go and vote. You're
hope-
welcome to come back. This hearing is going to go on for quite some time because we're going to go through this in detail, okay?
Okay.
So this hearing is going to go
I
on for
will,
quite some time.
as another American once said, I shall return. Thank you.
Look forward to it. I think I'm going to lay the COVID injection aside for the time being, but we'll come back because we keep hearing these hundreds and thousands of studies. And one thing I do want to enter into the record is Mr. Siri, what is it, about 2:30 in the morning?
Yes, sir.
Having received testimony, did a very organized and very effective response to Dr. Scott's testimony. And I want to enter that into the record. But, Mr. Siri, I'd like you to go to your section and talk about the 661 studies that Dr. Scott is talking about in terms of these inert placebo controls. And just describe that in detail. I think it's interesting.
Sure. Actually, I think Dr. Scott has done a great service in terms of pointing out the lack of clinical trials supporting the safety of the routine injected childhood vaccines. You see, he's saying there are 661 inert controlled trials to support the safety of the routine injected childhood vaccines. But when you actually drill down into those 661 trials, let me give you the breakdown of them, okay? 567 of these trials were not a routine injected vaccine for a disease on the CDC's childhood schedule. They were for HIV vaccines or other vaccines. So totally irrelevant to the safety of routine injected childhood vaccines. The remaining 94 studies, 70 of them did not involve healthy children. For example, trials of HIV positive adults. Again, completely irrelevant to the safety of childhood vaccines. Of the remaining 24, 21 did not involve a U.S. licensed vaccine it was not a vaccine used as a control to license a currently used U.S. licensed vaccine. For example, a Chinese flu shot, stuff like that. That leaves us with 3 studies, 3, that were claimed to have an inert control that were relied upon to license a routine injected childhood vaccine out of this entire list of 661. And these actually help really highlight the problem we have in terms of assessing safety with regards to the licensure of childhood vaccines. I want good clinical trial data. I need it for my practice. Okay, let me walk through those 3. One was a trial for the chickenpox vaccine, the varicella vaccine. Now, that trial had, it was only a few hundred people, so it was underpowered anyway. But Dr. Scott says it's got an inert control, but actually it was an injection of neomycin, an antibiotic. That's not inert. No. And neomycin used topically can cause issues, let alone injected. The second one was Gardasil 4 trial, which had thousands and thousands of girls and women in the control group. Almost all of them got an aluminum adjuvant injection. And then there were a few hundred, only a few hundred, that were labeled as a inert control, but they weren't. They got everything that's in the vial except for the antigens in the alum, which included L-histidine, polysorbate 80, sodium borate, yeast protein, not inert. And then the third one was a Gardasil 9 trial, which finally, by the way, did have a saline injection, just a few hundred. There were thousands and thousands of girls, women in that trial. They all got an injection of aluminum adjuvant, which I don't even know if it's ethical to inject somebody with something that's neuro and cytotoxic, but leaving that aside, the few hundred that got the placebo, but they only got it if they first got 3 doses of Gardasil 4. So again, not an actual inert control group. The result is there's 0 trials, 0, which were relied upon in this list of 6061 to license a routine injected vaccine on the CDC schedule that included a placebo, as well as 0 trials of a vaccine used as a control to license a routine injected vaccine on the CDC schedule. Ironically, by the way, this list supports the opposite of what it pretends to do. And if you want to know what was relied upon to license routine injected childhood vaccines, it's easy. Look at the clinical trial documents. That's what we do. And in fact, my submission to this committee went through every single vaccine that's a routine injected vaccine, and we cited precisely what the control was. Now, I'll just point out one quick thing here, too, is that the CNN fact-checked Secretary Kennedy's claim that there is no routine injected childhood vaccine that was licensed based on a placebo-controlled trial, and it relied on Dr. Scott's list, which at the time had about 248 trials listed as being inert. Secretary Kennedy then did exactly the analysis I did, put it out on a tweet, took it apart. Not one of those was relied upon to license a routine injected childhood vaccine, nor was it used as a control to license a routine injected childhood vaccine. And then after that, apparently, somebody then scrambled all the RCT numbers for those 248. So you can't match it up with the Secretary's tweet. And I guess to bury that issue, just added hundreds more, hoping that they can just hide behind this mountain of trials. But when you look at it carefully, it does not support the safety. In fact, it points out, it shows exactly the lack of safety. What's critical is this. Look, if you want to know the safety of a vaccine, and we need this stuff when parents call us and say, my child got XYZ issue after a vaccine, you need trials that are, one, properly controlled, which means either they got to get an inert substance or another vaccine that was properly licensed based on a robust trial. And then even if it has a proper control, it still needs to review safety long enough. And then even if it has a proper an inert control and it reviews long enough, it then still needs to be properly powered. It needs all 3 to be a proper, valid clinical trial. And I can tell you there's not a single routine injected childhood vaccine on the schedule that meets those criteria.
Well, again, the whole point of developing or doing this list, this crowdsourcing or whatever, leading an internet effort for the 661 studies was all to prove Secretary Kennedy wrong when he said that there's never been any of the vaccines on the childhood schedule that have had a true placebo-controlled, random-controlled trial. And you've just gone through the 661, and that statement's true. Dr. Scott, go ahead and, I guess try and refute that.
So, yeah, the reason why we did this project was to, yes, directly address through systematic evidence compilation the questions around the quantity and quality of clinical data supporting vaccine safety and efficacy. We found 1,000, we screened thousands. We've extracted data from 1,088 randomized controlled vaccine trials. We started our search in 1800, and studies were published from 1941 until 2025. Of those 1,088 studies that are randomized, controlled trials, 661 used what we consider an inert placebo, generally saline, et cetera. There were a number of other control groups used historically for various reasons, partly for ethical considerations and partly just because things have developed over time. As far as this being an example of how there aren't enough data to support the safety and efficacy of vaccines, I don't see the logic there.
Well, I think Mr. Siri completely picked your 661 studies apart. You said, saline, et cetera. I think it's wondering what's the et cetera. Mr. Rogers, you kind of raised your hand. You want to speak to that?
Yes, ma'am, please. Thank you, Senator Johnson. So look, in PhD programs, you have to read original sources and you have to define terms. Let's be crystal clear about the definitions of these terms, because the fate of the Republic depends on getting these definitions right. And Dr. Scott is playing fast and loose with these definitions, so let's be crystal clear about what we mean. Inert should mean that the substance does not cause a chemical or biological reaction in the body. When supporters of the status quo use the word inert, they can mean just about anything. Paul Offit routinely calls mercury and aluminum inert, even though they are known neurotoxicants. Philip Grandjean and Philip Langergan published, they're the best two toxicologists in the world. They published a study in 2014 that says both aluminum and ethyl mercury are known neurotoxicants. But the supporters of the status quo say that these things are safe, and they're not. They're absolutely not. In the context of vaccines, placebo should mean saline as verified by independent third-party testing. That's not what the supporters of the status quo mean when they say placebo. The fact is the FDA has no regulations concerning the contents of placebos. So manufacturers can put whatever they want into the comparator intervention and can still call it a placebo by law. Furthermore, scientific journals have no regulations concerning the contents of placebos. Sometimes the manufacturers disclose them in connection with a study, and about 2/3 of the time they do not. And a double-blind randomized control trial should have two groups. A group that receives the vaccine, that's the treatment group, and a completely unvaccinated group. Given a saline placebo, that's the control group. That's not what the supporters of the status quo mean when they say randomized control trial. They compared two groups, but one group gets the new vaccine and another group gets a shot full of aluminum adjuvants. Or they compare a new shot to an older shot. But the one thing they never do is to compare a completely unvaccinated group with a vaccinated group, because everyone knows that such a trial would show harms. So if you go through all 1,704 trials in the database that Dr. Scott has put together, as Aaron Siri has done, you'll find that the inert ingredients are not inert. The placebo is not saline, and the randomized control trial does not have a completely unvaccinated control group. And we know that my assertion here is correct because on page 9 of his written statement, Dr. Scott states that vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies are especially prone to bias. It's hard to imagine a more Orwellian statement. Up is down, left is right, dogs are cats. And according to Dr. Scott, a proper vaccinated versus unvaccinated study is unethical. That's why we're in this mess. That's why we have an autism and chronic disease epidemic in this country.
Scott, first after Scott respond to that.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if you went through all 661 trials. We haven't even conducted the full analysis yet. But once
I think Mr. Siri,
so
Siri kind of has.
you should join our team. Yeah.
You see, he's got a pretty cracked team doing that.
Yeah, smart guy.
If you let me make the decisions, I'll join your team.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's team up. So, yeah, first of all, yeah, we are. This is a work in progress. Hopefully it'll be published, and once it's published, I welcome any feedback for sure. In terms of how we defined controls, That has not been publicized yet because we haven't published this, okay? But we did break it down between inert placebos that were biologically inert and placebos that were immunologically inert. So biologically inert placebos primarily include saline or buffer or water. And so there are certainly many studies that met that criteria. Then there are adjuvant-only controls. So we separated all that.
But again, the whole point of the 661 studies was to prove Secretary Kennedy wrong when he never said, and I don't know the exact statement, but there's never been any vaccines on the childhood schedule that have had a true random
I
control.
have the quote here if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sure. So Secretary Kennedy said, this was the CNN article reported, that, quote, 76 shots that children in this country receive, unquote, meaning routine injected vaccines on the CDC schedule, quote, none of them have been safety tested in pre-licensure studies against the placebo. And in response to that, the CNN article quotes Dr. Scott as saying that that made Dr. Scott's ears perk up, end quote. Scott, an infectious disease specialist at Stanford University, knew that the assertions couldn't be true. And now he says he has the proof, meaning Dr. Scott, quote unquote, knew the assertion couldn't be true before he even looked and did it. So whatever he's planning to publish, obviously he had his a priori belief beforehand.
So
I was familiar with the body of evidence. I wasn't aware that there were going to be 1,088.
So
Well, then why not start with the clinical trials that are actually published by the FDA and relied upon to license each vaccine?
We've included those as well.
Again, the problem with this discussion debate is it just gets into a lot of detail, and you have accusations going back and forth and assertions made back and forth. It is very difficult to follow, okay? Again, I personally think that Mr. Sear did a pretty good job of taking that 661 studies apart. But I want to go back to something that's, again, a little bit easier for us lay people to contemplate, and go back to numbers. I'm an accountant, I like numbers. In your testimony, you talk about the CDC estimates where I think the final number that I'm dealing with is a study that said the CDC between 1994 and 2023 that vaccines saved 1.1 million lives in America, okay? So again, I'm just working with numbers here now, okay? So let's take the 1.1 million. I'm comparing to the 154 million. I'm trying to make sense of these numbers, right? So if there's 154 million lives saved over 50 years, according to the WHO, CDC is saying, well, it's 1.1 million here in America over 30 years. So I start doing the extrapolations, because again, these numbers aren't science, they're models. So let me continue the model. 1.4 million, we're 4% of the world's population, that'd be 27.5 million lives saved according to the CDC worldwide, just based extrapolating our share of population. That's over 30 years. So divide that by 30, come up per year, it's about 910,000. Times 50 years, that's about 46 million worldwide. So there's discrepancy right there between what the CDC is saying lives saved. Again, they're just making this up. They're just creating some model that is highly biased toward their viewpoint. The World Health Organization says 154 million. And again, I think Mr. Sear did a pretty good job of picking that propaganda apart. And that's what it is. It's propaganda. It's not science, it's propaganda. But let's dig a little bit further. In that CDC study, the way they get 1.1 million lives saved is basically off of 3 diseases: diphtheria, hepatitis B, and measles. And Mr. Sear does an excellent job of laying out some basic numbers that are hard to refute. So let's go through them. Diphtheria, about 750,000 of that 1.1 million. By the way, those 3 diseases account for about 84% of the 1.1 million lives saved according to the CDC. So how do they calculate that? Well, they say that diphtheria, they've saved about 750,000 lives over 30 years. That's 25,000 lives a year is what they're claiming is saved with vaccines preventing diphtheria deaths. The problem with that number is in 1948, when the first vaccine was licensed for diphtheria, the actual death was 634 per year. But let's, by the way, put up the diphtheria chart here. I think we have it on the video as well, don't we?
was the first.
So the first diphtheria vaccine was put in use in 1929, was it?
It was 1926.
1926. But the first licensed vaccine was 1948.
Well, between 1900 and 1926, the mortality from
Oh,
diphtheria.
I'm getting to that.
So the first licensed or the licensed vaccine was in 1926, but it was rarely used. And between 1926 and the 40s, the mortality declined at the same rate in areas that used it, mostly major cities.
So by the time the first vaccine was widely used to obtain licensure,
1949 was the first
the
licensure of
death rate
DTP.
had already declined by 97.8%.
When routine vaccine use really began in 1949.
By 26, it already declined by about 80-some%. Well, it
Between-
wasn't from vaccine. That's from improved sanitation. We weren't living in squalor. There's better nutrition. There's a host of reasons why diphtheria dramatically was reduced in terms of rates per 100,000. So by the time we really started widely using diphtheria vaccine in 1948, we'd already reduced the cases, the rate fatality of.
Mortality had declined by over 97%, and
Okay,
none
by
of that,
98%.
virtually none of that had to do with vaccine.
But
It couldn't
again,
have been.
that year, there were 634 deaths.
That's right.
And the CDC is saying we're saving 25,000 deaths a year of diphtheria.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's the most stark example of this. Hepatitis B, they're claiming 3,000 lives saved per year.
Right.
But in 1980, when that
First vaccine,
fir-
1981.
first came about, there were about 294 deaths. It's actually increased now that we've got the vaccine out there.
There's about 1,700 deaths a year now, so the number of deaths have gone up, but they're claiming 3,000 lives saved somehow.
So for measles, they're claiming about 2,700 deaths per year. 1963, prior years to the release of that vaccine, they're about 400 deaths per year.
And there were
So,
about
so in total, if you add up those three illnesses, okay, a total of 30,700 lives claimed saved per year for those three illnesses, whereas the death rate of the year of basically use of vaccines total of 1,328. So they're literally claiming a 23-fold increase of lives saved over the actual death count when the vaccines came about. So again, there's all these claims, 154 million, 1.1 million. The numbers simply don't add up. And what's very clear, we could actually put up the measles chart. You can quick do that in the same basic dynamic. By the time we actually had a measles vaccine, there was a 98% reduction in the rate of mortality with measles.
With
Again, that was
with
through-
increasing
that was through
population.
Again, that's right, the book, Dissolving Illusions. Improved sanitation, improved nutrition, antibiotics, other treatment, which is a big problem with me with COVID, that we sabotaged treatment. We ignored treatment and put everything toward the COVID injection. But anyway, I think that's a point that needs to be made. What actually brought down the rate of death in these infectious diseases? Sure, vaccines might have provided the tail end of that, right? But the bulk of the reduction of those diseases occurred well before vaccines ever became popularized. Correct, Mr. Siri?
Absolutely. And overstating the benefits of a medical product is just as dangerous as overstating its risks. And they
Blumenthal.
overstate the benefits based on this data by numerous folds. There's a few other points regarding that if you'd like me to address them. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just by way of explanation, I voted, and we have another hearing going on in the Judiciary Committee on internet safety for the parents in this room. When you're done here, if you want to come over to the subcommittee of the Judiciary chaired by Senator Blackburn of Tennessee, we're looking at ways that the internet and social media can be made safer for children, Kids Online Safety Act. And I say that by way of explanation for my absence. I do apologize, but I think maybe we have some common ground on stopping toxic content that's driven to children by big tech. Just as, by the way, I have urged and demanded and taken action to stop some of the abuses in big pharma. And the chairman and I have talked about ways to reduce the prices of big pharma. I'm working with Senator Cornyn on a measure that would lower prices of pharmaceutical drugs by eliminating some of the abuses. So I just want to make clear, I'm not here as an advocate for big pharma. I don't think anyone would ever say that I was. I want to come back to maybe a little bit of science here. Dr. Scott, what would happen if we stop routine childhood vaccines?
Well, we know that there would be preventable outbreaks of preventable illness and death.
And maybe you can expand a little bit. Why is it that unvaccinated children who, say, come down with measles can lead to outbreaks in schools, in communities around the country? I know it sounds like a simple, common sense question, but I'm not a scientist, and I'm asking questions because I'm curious.
Yeah, so these are contagious diseases, and they can spread to people who either weren't able to get vaccinated, or who didn't get vaccinated, or who are severely immunocompromised.
And that's substantiated by studies and by real-life experience, most recently in Texas, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Vaccines, have definitely played a role in, helping stop these outbreaks. I don't know how that could be denied.
Correct. And you have recently launched a project to document all of the randomized control trials that have been conducted by licensed vaccines. Could you talk a little bit about what that project has revealed?
Yeah, I think that you might have missed some of our discussion, but
I apologize to you as I do to everyone here.
And let me just say that the scientific evidence supporting vaccine safety and efficacy really represents one of the most extensive bodies of medical research ever assembled. And so we screened thousands of studies online, and we cataloged 1,088 randomized controlled trials that were published between 1941 and 2025 from around the world, covering vaccines from adenovirus to Zika virus. These are all publicly accessible, and transparency is built in by design. On our Google spreadsheet that is accessible to everyone with internet access, there are links that you can click on to see the primary source. And so across 7 decades of trials, we found no evidence of suppression. The challenge really is the sheer volume, not access to data. There are a lot of studies out there. There are a lot of poor quality studies out there that get published, even no matter how bad they are. There is a massive amount of studies out there, especially around COVID vaccines.
And the ones that are not published are available, are they not? It's available. Studies are available even if they're not published.
Well, I mean, this one wasn't.
And others as well, correct? There are links to them. They're available to people who ask about them, who want to make them public.
Yeah, but for the most part, it's not that hard to get a study published somewhere. I mean, there are thousands of vaccine studies.
Mr. Siri, we've been talking about medical issues. You're not a medical doctor, are you?
No, sir.
And you're not an immunologist or biologist or any kind of...
Or vaccinologist, no, but I depose them regularly, including the world's leading ones with regards to vaccines, and I have to make my claims based on actual evidence when I go to court with regards to vaccines. I don't get to rely on titles.
Okay. But you're not a doctor.
No, I prefer not to be a doctor because I prefer to rely on the evidence, not slogans like we've been hearing.
Okay. Let me ask you, have you spoken to Secretary Kennedy about his decision to approve COVID-19 or limit the